And let's bring in a member of the House Judiciary Committee and Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, great to see you today. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Jen. It's a bit of a funeral atmosphere among the House Democrats today as they're having to assess the real glaring weaknesses of their candidate. And that report we just got from Logan seems to indicate that there's a group of people who've been responsible for keeping Joe Biden in the witness protection program, like so that we didn't ever see him, so that he didn't ever emerge with utterances. And now he's had to come out of the witness protection program, and it's been somewhat predictably perilous for him politically.
Yeah, so let me ask you, give us a feel for how things are going on Capitol Hill right now. You have a number of colleagues that have come out, expressed concern for the president that he should step aside. And I would imagine a lot more that are kind of feeling this out, waiting to see which way things go. But what are you hearing there in Washington?
Well, I am observing denial sort of slip away as the governing atmosphere of the Democratic caucus a little bit more each day. Congressman Richie Torres from New York has just explicitly described the state of denial Democrats are in who believe Joe Biden can continue in this race. But it's also been really the entire Democratic Party that's been part of this conspiracy to hide Joe Biden's condition. And now that's being laid bare, and folks are having to go before their own voters, even sometimes their own reliable Democrat voters, and people are saying, what gives? If this guy didn't have the elevator going to the top floor, why did we have him in charge of the nuclear codes and making key decisions about all these wars that are breaking out everywhere? And there's another dynamic, Jen, I have to point out. It seems to me the batch of Washington Democrats who want to run for president in 2028 are like willing to ride Joe Biden to defeat happily because they don't want to see a situation. I mean, they will ride Joe. Like, think about it. AOC, Ro Khanna, these are people who want to run for president in 2028. And so they're like, you know what? No matter what weekend at Bernie's experience we have to set up with Joe Biden to kind of prop him up, we're willing to do that to preserve our prospects in 2028. It's an interesting little sub-dynamic that I've observed.
Yeah, and they would have a longer runway to be able to get going instead of right on the spur of the moment. But somebody you can almost see that she could taste it is Kamala Harris, the vice president. In fact, there are New York Times headline about Harris being tested as far as her chances against Trump. So lay that out for me, because I'm sure the argument on her behalf would be she would talk about abortion, which some people think might be a challenge for Republicans, that she might bring in a minority vote that has been trending toward Mr. Trump in recent months. How do you see a battle against her in the presidency, in that race?
You're right, Bob. I think every time Kamala Harris shakes Joe Biden's hand, she's checking his pulse because she's so ambitious to get into the Oval and behind the big desk. But here's what we've observed. The voters in a lot of these so-called blue wall swing states, the Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, they look at Harris a lot more like how they looked at a Hillary Clinton than they do looking at her like a Joe Biden archetype. And so politically, I think she's going to have a hard time even assembling the Biden coalition such that it had, white working class voters in the Midwest thinking Joe was Scranton Joe and middle class Joe. Those voters aren't there for Kamala Harris. They're ripe for the taking for Republicans up and down the ballot. And so I don't buy this prospect that she will somehow energize Democrats and flip their fortunes. That said, when we've got you've got to look behind door number one or door number two. If behind door number one you have a nursing home patient who's been subjected to the elder abuse that continues at this press conference tonight, that's probably a more preferable opponent than whatever Kamala Harris would bring to bear, though she certainly has her weaknesses that we would exploit as well.
Congressman, it was interesting to see a tweet from one of your Democrat colleagues, Richie Torres, talking about the fact that this one debate performance is more of a pattern. It's denial, it's self-delusion. He says that the president didn't have just one bad debate. And I think a lot of us on the right who have been talking about this for years have been saying that all along and agree with that. But you're not seeing Democrats really admitting that, at least not many of them. What do you think is going to be the political fallout with all of this as we look to the November election? election? Because I'm hearing some insiders say that Democrats are concerned that not only will they lose the presidency, but they might also not have control of the House and the Senate.
Yeah, well, in the next few hours, we're going to see Joe Biden attempt another performance. But so far, it's kind of been shot chaser, hasn't it, Jen? We had the debate that was catastrophic for Joe Biden. And then after that, the George Stephanopoulos interview didn't go so well. And then even after that, when Joe Biden was calling into Morning Joe, like, he had a hard time even completing sentences. They would just trail off into nonsense gibberish words. And at the press conference tonight, even if Joe Biden is able to muscle his way through 10 questions, I think voters are worried about what the bad moments look like, right? Like, just because grandpa has a good afternoon doesn't mean you don't have to take his keys away because he's a danger on the road. And like, Joe Biden is definitely in the take your keys away era of his condition. And we all see it. And God forbid our enemies see it. And America's, those who would do us harm throughout the world, see our commander in chief in a diminished state. It almost makes you wonder who really is the president right now. If something tragic were to happen, I guess they've said they don't even want to wake Joe Biden up after 8 p.m. I mean, Cinderella at least could make it to midnight, but Joe Biden gets put to bed at 8 p.m. It's a heck of a condition.
Which brings to mind the three people that Congressman Comer is subpoenaing to bring in. First of all, do you think they actually will respond, or will they try to plead that this is executive privilege, that sort of thing? But if they do come in, what kind of information do you want from them?
Well, there's obviously been a conspiracy to conceal the condition of the president from the country. And the people who are closest to the president are going to have the most knowledge about the steps that were taken and the decisions that were made in the furtherance of that conspiracy. I don't think we're talking about crimes here, but I do think that this is an important function of legislative oversight to see, are we going to have to change laws so that there's more transparency in a president's physical and mental condition, so they can't just be like whisked away to Camp David and wrapped in bubble wrap so no one can see someone who's deteriorating. And I would feel that way about any president. So to inform our lawmaking function, I think we want to learn about how we're able to get to this point where a president who has a hard time completing a thought is now like dealing with an invasion in Ukraine, an invasion on our own southern border, and even Hamas attacking Israel. And so, Joe Biden obviously is not in command of those circumstances. And so maybe these three people can enlighten us as to who is.
Congressman, I want to ask you about, the situation on the right. Obviously, things are looking very strong. You look at polling right now for President Trump, and we're waiting for him to pick a running mate. We thought maybe that would happen down at his rally in Doral, Florida. We saw Senator Rubio there. It seemed like maybe there was going to be an announcement. That didn't come. But, in talking to some Democrats, they have concerns. They say, listen, if Trump picks somebody like Rubio, that's concerning for us. That's going to bring out the Hispanic vote. What are your thoughts on that? As obviously there is a lot that could change in the coming weeks here in terms of whether he's running against a Kamala Harris and somebody she picks as a running mate. Who do you think might be the best pick for President Trump? Or if you don't want to name a name, what would be the qualities that you think he needs in that running mate?
Well, the fact that we've got three choices as good as those you've got on the screen right now really showcases the depth of the Republican bench. I think all of them would be fine choices. If I were President Trump, I would pick one of the two senators. Here's why. We need a vice president that does more than attend, weddings and funerals. We need a vice president who is going to go over to the Senate and be John Adams-like in presiding over the Senate as the vice president is constitutionally commanded to do. We've seen in more modern times a lot of the running of the Senate, the calendaring, the choices they make about confirmation votes and sequencing being left to the Senate majority leader. That's not a constitutional framework. That's just what has evolved. And so I think somebody like a J.D. Vance, like a Marco Rubio, they understand the Senate enough to be able to effectively be the presiding officer and get a lot of President Trump's nominees through very quickly. And that's important because we only have 4 years here. And so we can't allow the days to dwindle as the president's not getting the senior members of his team confirmed. And I think that Vance or Rubio would be excellent choices in that regard and could fill that really, really critical role that will define the Trump presidency in its early days.
When you're talking about the top of the ticket, which is what the Democrats are dealing with, why is that so important? I don't mean that to sound like a simplistic question, but you're somebody, you were elected, even though the person at the top was not. How does it filter down? Which obviously the answer to this is why Democrats are freaking out. But give me a feel from your perspective how that goes.
No, it really is a great question. What House members know is you can only outrun the top of the ticket by a few points at best in most circumstances. And so if you look at races where Joe Biden won that congressional district in 2020, but now is losing it by 5 or 6 points, those members of Congress are really freaking out. And frontliners are always kind of concerned and worried. But what's happened with the new polling we've seen, particularly in the suburbs, is that there's a new class of vulnerable Democrats who maybe won their last contest by 8 to 12 points, but now are looking at a margin of error race. And these are people who aren't used to being on the front lines, having to deal with a tough challenger, and really rolling up their sleeves and getting out there on the rubber chicken dinner Rotary Club circuit. And it's interesting to watch. That's where the freak out is coming the most. The new Democrat frontliners who thought they were easily coasting in a left-leaning district now are seeing the downward pressure Joe Biden is putting on their own prospects, and that's the batch putting pressure on him.
Yes.
All right. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Thanks, Congressman.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thanks, Jen.
Good to see you.